Welcome back to Moments That Matter. We're talking today with one of my dear friends, Raine Riley, who is getting ready to graduate from Clemson University with her master's in communication, technology, and society. I had the privilege last week of sitting in on the defense of her thesis, which is an analysis of narrative advertising. If that sounds a bit off-putting, hang in there because it's not. As part of her thesis work, she reviewed scores of advertisements that tell stories, some of which would be very familiar to all of us. She and I share a love for all things advertising, so I wanted her to come on the show and talk about not only what she finds fascinating about advertising and the effect that it has on us as consumers, but also how she got to this place in her life. Since on this podcast, we're all about what we call clearness committee moments, those times in our lives that provide direction or redirection if we're paying attention. I'm hopeful that you'll hear about those times as well from her. So good to have you with us, Raine.
Hi.
We've known each other for a while now. We led a house church together, and I even had the wonderful opportunity of officiating your wedding a little over a year ago. And it's been fascinating for me to watch your progression from undergrad to your first profession and now grad, your second profession. And I thought maybe our listeners could benefit from hearing about that progression, especially as they themselves may have some important decisions to make about studies and career. So can you tell us a bit about your journey, including any clearness committee moments along the way?
Sure. So I have a tendency of backing it up way further than it needs to go, so I'm going to try not to do that. But so I guess I'll start kind of with my undergrad. So I actually graduated from Clemson in 2016 with a degree in travel and tourism. And honestly, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with that. I kind of came in thinking that I might run or open a winery with my family, and then that just changed as things do as you go throughout your studies. But all I knew is that I really loved my program, and so that kind of led me into my first, I guess, big person adult career in where I was actually an excursion coordinator at a local institute that's actually part of Clemson. And so what I did there was I planned trips for mostly like retirees, but really for anybody who was part of this institute. And I ended up, this is just facts that probably no one cares about, but I basically ended up creating this travel program that didn't exist before. So I kind of took it from 0 to 80 trips a year, which was really cool. And I'm really, really proud of that. And I'm trying to give myself permission to be proud of myself for things that I've done, which is not something that I always am or do. But I did that for a while. I did it for about 3 years. And then I decided that I wanted to try something different. Now, in terms of clearness committee moments, I did, so when I first started at my first job, my first career, I really struggled. And I don't want to make it, I don't mean to sound overly religious or anything, but like I really felt like Satan was beating down on me pretty much every day, and it was really hard. Those first 3 months, I had a lot of really bad, I guess, imposter syndrome as part of it, and I got a lot of frustrations just with like, man, not everybody here believes exactly as I believe, and like that was just really hard for me. But then just kind of one day, or I guess, I'm sure it was over the course of those first 3 months really, but I just kind of felt this piece of like, this is where I'm supposed to be. And that was really, really neat, and something that I've only felt probably a couple times in my life. And so that was when I kind of realized, like, you know what, it's okay. God's called me to this place for this reason. Working at a place that is so tightly connected to like a university and tightly connected to just this community of academics was really great, and I really loved it, but it was also really hard because a lot of the people that I was working with on a daily basis were very much not Christian or anywhere close to religious. And so that, like, I don't know, it was hard, but it was also really rewarding because I had some moments in there. And honestly, I think this is, now that I'm thinking more about it, this was probably the moment that it really shifted. Was like I was having a conversation with someone and I just like really felt the Holy Spirit take over that conversation, and kind of at that point where I'm like, I don't really remember what I said, but it felt right and it felt good. And so I ended up having like an hour conversation with someone who showed no interest in God or Jesus or redemption or love. And I realized like, wow, like I actually can make a difference here, not just with making a difference in people's lives. Like this demographic of older adults and retirees was one that I really, really cared about. But not only was I able to make a difference in like, hey, maybe you'll be less lonely or we'll enrich you with education, I was also like, I could actually have an impact on some people's spiritual journeys. And so that was really, really inspiring to me, that moment. And then also kind of throughout the next couple of years, I was able to have some of those moments. But I will say, and Paul is very aware of this entire situation, about a year and a half in, probably, I started to feel that calling wane or go in a different direction. And I really felt in my soul that that was not where I was supposed to be, and that I had served my purpose there. And for any of you who are listening who have that feeling, or if you are going into a career and you ever feel that feeling, get out. I mean, not to be an alarmist, but like I spent another year and a half in a place where I should not have been. Now, that isn't to say that where I am right now in the time that I'm here isn't what God had planned, because it definitely is. And I know that, and I see that every single day. I see that, you know, I was called to this place at this time for a reason. And God uses us in all of those ways. But man, about a year and a half into that position, I really felt like, okay, it's time. And this is not where I'm called to be. And so I kind of started looking at, okay, what could I do? And honestly, it got to the point where I was like, literally anything. Like, I just got to do something. It's just, I don't think that this is where I'm supposed to be. And like I said, I stuck in for another year and a half. That was not the right thing to do, but it's what happened and it's what I did. But it did allow me to actually start thinking about what are the things that I really care about, right? So I've already mentioned I really cared about that population that I was working with, but planning trips was not really what I loved. And so, but what about it? There were aspects that I did. And so what about that did I enjoy? And what I found was that I really enjoyed the marketing aspect. I really enjoyed making people feel something with what I had written or with images. Something that I don't know if y'all have talked about before, but we at our church used to do Film Fest, where people in our church community would just make movies and then we would screen them. And I kind of spearheaded that for a couple of years, and I really loved it. And I really loved making films, and I would push myself to the limits. I tried CGI or and green screens, and that was not my calling. I learned that very quickly, but I was like, man, I really love creating, and I really love making people feel something. I love telling stories, and I see that in advertising, and I see that in marketing. So what does that mean, and how can I do something with that? So I ended up taking a couple of classes just kind of randomly. And that led me to applying for my current master's program because I realized that I cared a lot about the message, and I cared a lot about what the message did to people or how people interpreted the message. And so my program was called Communication, Technology, and Society. And the society part is what really stuck out to me. That's, I think, different from a lot of other communications programs and even advertising and marketing programs, which are very business heavy. What it seemed was that the program that I would be entering into was really about what's this message, how are people using it. And so long story short, I ended up going into this master's program, and I will say it's probably the hardest thing that I've ever done in my entire life. And would I go back and do it again? I don't know. No, I'm kidding. I totally would, but that's kind of what got me to this point of doing a thesis and graduating and hopefully going into this new career that's very focused on communication and messaging.
Yes, and having been part of your journey and seeing you in the best of times and the worst of times, I will say to our listeners, we get to a point, and I've been there, Raine's been there, lots of people have been there, where you feel like, you know, if you're a ship, all of the anchors have been pulled up, you're ready to go someplace, but there are no sails that have been unfurled, and you're just drifting. And that is actually an important place to be, actually, because that's what allows you enough time to kind of figure out what it is that you're supposed to be doing without making a major mistake. So kudos to you, Raine, for hanging in there with that process. So we're up to the master's and even the thesis. So can you tell us how you decided on that thesis topic and what exactly it was, and like what got you thinking about that? Maybe even one particular commercial or something like that that could turn into a final project.
Sure. So my journey to getting to this point where I have a thesis and was able to present on it and submit it and graduate with it was tumultuous, to say the least. So one of the things that inspired me was, like I said, I really care about messaging, and I care about why we care about them. And so one of the things that I was having a really hard time with was figuring out what the heck could I actually do. So I knew that I wanted to do a thesis. So with this program and with more programs nowadays, we had the option of doing a thesis project, or comprehensive exams. And I knew that I didn't want to do comprehensive exams. I knew I wanted to do a thesis of sorts, but I really, really wanted to do something along the lines of a project because I knew I wanted to go back into the industry. And I wanted to have something where I could say, hey, look at this thing that I did. And so I was trying to figure out, okay, what are the things that I care about, and not things that I care about right now, but things that have like been long standing. So a lot of my course papers influenced what I ended up doing, but I still kind of had to redo a lot of it. So one of the things that I really focused on a lot was social justice. And that's something that I really, really care about, and I know I will care about for the long term. But that isn't what I focused on my thesis, because I wanted to see what's been this underlying theme, right? And so I realized that what I cared about, I care about social justice, but I was looking at commercials that focused on social justice. I was thinking about, like, what are some of the things that I did at my old job that I really enjoyed? And that was storytelling. And so and sport, of course, is another thing that I really, really care about. And I looked at it in a lot of my course papers. But again, I was like, but I'm looking at commercials. And so what I realized was that was the common thread. And that's what kind of led me into this idea of looking at narrative advertising. So what I was able to do, which I don't know if like now is a good time or we'll talk about it later, but what I was able to do was actually look at narrative advertising, identify some of the holes in scholarship, and then also identify some of the places that just the practice of like marketing and advertising where I could bolster that as well. And so I ended up doing a thesis project, and it kind of fulfilled two main purposes. One was to fill a gap in literature where different types of advertisements weren't really, people were talking about advertisements, but there hasn't been one like comprehensive piece of literature that could really help with that. And so I wanted my thesis to be that for scholarship. But then I also wanted to do a project, and I ended up creating this guide that basically shows different features that are in narrative advertising and in narrative advertisements that make us feel a certain way. And so I do want to pause on that conversation though really quickly and just say what got me to that point, what got me to this point of kind of having this idea and then bringing it to fruition, which has changed a billion times, no kidding. But one of the things that was really, really helpful was my advisor. So my committee chair, I think probably more than anything else was what really helped me. And it was just really helpful to have my committee chair. And I will say, one of the things that was really important to me when I was choosing my committee and specifically my chairperson was that that our personalities would blend. So my committee chair was actually, he's really involved in strategic communication and crisis management. And so that's not exactly where I went, even though PR was another thing that I'm very fascinated by. But I felt like our personalities would align. And I will say, like, he is also a Christian, and that was really obvious to me pretty much when we first met. And so I truly do not believe that I would have gotten through this last year and a half without him as my committee chair, because he not only was able to help me figure out what this idea actually was. I mean, seriously, we sat there for hours and I just would write words on a page, and he would be like, okay, I think this idea connects with this idea, and like draw lines between them. And anyway, we would sit there and talk for hours about these really messy ideas that I would have. And he helped me kind of sculpt that into what it became. But also, he was there for me as a mentor. And I would say if anyone is considering going to grad school, that's so important. And maybe for some people it's not, but for me that was what I needed, and that was really, really important to have someone who would be able to support me academically, but also just as a person. So that, I just wanted to give that little shout out there because that was really helpful, and that was really what got me to this point of having this project that I'm now able to show people and be really proud of.
Yeah, he seemed to really enjoy himself in the defense. He was obviously loving the topic and what you'd done with it and everything like that. So that was great to see.
Yeah.
I remember a comment by one of the professors saying basically that what you'd done was important because advertisers are busy people, and they are busy coming up with ideas. They are too busy to research, and to see trends and that sort of thing, which is exactly what you were doing.
Right.
So that's kind of that's at least one of the gaps, I guess, that was being fulfilled. So can you give us just an idea? Pick a commercial, okay, that everybody would know, and just talk about kind of what was it that you were seeing, and what was it that you felt like was really powerful, let's say, about the program?
Sure. So there are three commercials that I really focused on pretty much throughout my entire time in this program. But the one that really inspired this particular project that I did was, I'll let you guys just like close your eyes and picture February 2nd, 2020. You're watching the Super Bowl, and about the second quarter, I think, this commercial comes on, and it's about an old man who's trying to remember his wife. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll tell you, but if you do, that's awesome. And this is exactly what I'm saying. It's like, they're so powerful, right? So Google released a commercial entitled Loretta. And the whole point of this commercial was really honestly to sell their product, which is the new Google Assistant, or then new Google Assistant that is, I think it's called the Google Show or something. I don't know. But anyway, it basically has a screen that you can see pictures and movies and videos and stuff like that on. But what I found was really fascinating about it was that, Google's a tech giant, right? And I was sitting there weeping at a commercial about Google. And I thought that was really fascinating. And then I took to Twitter and found that like everyone else was also weeping at this commercial. And so I was like, okay, but like, why is this? How can they do this? How can this company make this whole entire group of people of all different ages, races, nationalities, backgrounds feel the same thing? And I wanted to answer that question. And so that's really what kind of sparked this whole idea. I also wanted to I looked at other commercials. So the two other ones that I looked at, or that came to mind just now, was Nike's Dream Crazy with Colin Kaepernick. And then Pepsi's Jump In from 2017, which was with Kendall Jenner. Didn't really go over super well. And so what I noticed was that all three of these ads were telling a story. They were all telling a story of some sort. And all three of them made people feel something very strongly. And I wanted to know, why is it that two of these, or really one of them, Google, worked really, really well. One of them, Nike, worked really, really well, but also was pretty divisive. And then the other, Pepsi, that just was off. Like, it did not go well at all and was pulled within 24 hours. I wanted to find out why. So that was kind of the inspiration, was honestly the Google commercial was really what inspired this particular project, but I used what I had been looking at and trying to find in the other commercials.
Thanks for listening to Moments That Matter, a podcast that looks at the moments in our lives that come along from time to time that have consequences long after the moment, especially those moments that have to do with the choice of vocation. In his book, Let Your Life Speak, Listening for the Voice of Vocation, Parker Palmer speaks of a clearness committee in the Quaker tradition, wherein a group of older, wiser people ask questions of someone considering a life choice as a way of clarifying the next step. We may not meet with a committee about these big decisions, but we all have these critical junctures in our lives, which we can think of as clearness committee moments. We need to pay attention to these moments because they are profound and potentially life-altering. We'll relay stories from our lives and interview others about theirs, especially noting the clearness committee moments, those we choose to recognize and those that were sadly ignored, those decisions that were made with God in mind and those that were not. Our hope is that these podcasts will cause you to think of the same kind of moments in your life with new clarity.